I was talking about last week. When I was talking about how the organism of humanity either reacts to the biochemical changes in what would appear to be out there, and only one of two possible ways that the organism, that is you, responds by acting or it responds by thinking about acting. I gave you a week to ponder any significance you may see, because there is much significance. And I'm going into it a little further. There must be the ability to think about acting. There must be the alternative to acting as the only response. For any organism to be open-ended, life would not be growing through man if it was limited to only action. To remind you again, from your notes, a few of you did get a flash of it. And those of you who should have gotten a longer fused flash that I mentioned of getting a glimpse of what I was talking about, and then to see the almost inability of ordinary consciousness to remember it. Forget thinking about it, to even remember it. And that is that there is really no question beyond the sorts of things that I warned you at one time were somewhat elementary, that appeared to be psychological descriptions of me saying there is no out there, and that all the old questions about heredity versus the environment were absolutely moot. It is down to the level that ordinary consciousness would see as being absolutely physical, if it could see it. And I went ahead and used ordinary college-level scientific terminology. I didn't make up a new mystical term. I simply used biochemical. And it's an absolute fact that all the notions that consciousness has that something is going on out here to which I am being subject, and it is a particular, it is a unique situation for man, that this is not the sort of thing that a cow or a warthog would ever confront. They may have to fight for their life. They may have much in common with me at some very feral level, but that which is normally my opposition, that which is my weight and my burden to bear, is uniquely human. Part of the proof being even verbal history of the many ideas of man's unique soul, his singular spirit, his consciousness, his individual personality. And yet, literally, there is no escape from this. You had a week, anyone who cared to pursue that. As mundane, as unexciting as it sounds, back to ordinary terminology, ordinary ideas, that there is the physical side of man and then there is some kind of psychological side of man. The physical side of man, ordinary consciousness might readily agree with me when I pointed out that all information, everything must be transmitted by the senses. And almost any sophisticated person would agree with that without seeing any particular significance. But what ordinary consciousness can hardly conceive of is the kinds of things I've been bringing all you people up to for the last few years. That we've got to have a group of people floating around here that on a good day, a percentage of you, all put together, has an almost continuing low-level awareness of this, that the very singular things, that which ordinary people refer to as being psychological, or intellectual, or spiritual, it doesn't matter what you call it out there, it has got to turn into a biochemical change in you, or it does not exist. And I don't care what it is. It could be Moses saying, God, talk to me. If there was some God outside this system, some figure, and he did come down indeed and talk to Moses, You do understand Moses had to have fairly good hearing. Or else he'd come back and say, I think God talked to me. What he's saying, he'd say, you know, I don't know. The battery's been weak on my hearing aid now for 2 weeks, and I'm not sure. It sounded like, you know, there was something about Sunday and Frankfurters, or I don't know. Besides that little humor, that praise, you receiving a phone call that some member of your family, some friend has been hurt in an accident. You hear gossip around the office, a canard, perhaps, that you may be promoted. None of that exists. It is true that that sort of thing goes on only with humans and not with warthogs. But you are left at that same level that the warthog hears a noise. He hears a cracking of a limb on the forest floor, and he reacts to it. That sounds simple enough. But there is no difference in that and someone saying, gee, I like you. No matter what it is out there, it is turned into a biochemical change in you, literally. Either you see it, you hear it, you feel it, you smell it. You smell it. In ordinary terminology, apparently it is said about some kind of psychological series of association. Is that blueberry muffins? That reminds me of my mother. And that makes me feel bad because I never did like my mother. An obvious case, psychological association. And it's not. The smell went in there and it created whatever. If we froze reality and said that person, the person for whom I was just speaking, if we froze reality right there, his entire being, but let's go to the brain, this singular thing in man, that there would be a biochemical structure right then. A split second later, the aroma hit of blueberry muffins, and here, literally, physically, by ordinary terminology, this whole process, childhood, blueberry muffins, hating my mother, now I feel bad. Forget all of what happened to mother. What happened to you? No matter what you call it, unless it is turned into biochemical action in your own brain, whether it got there through feel or whether it got through smell or through something you heard, it is turned into biochemical activity or it does not exist, all the way from blueberry muffins and hatred of your mother to believing God talked to you. That's it. And on that basis, you notice it is not slaying people last week nor this. But once you begin to get some continuing awareness of this, I guarantee you, you will be off balance for a while. Of course, I guarantee you further, at least about the last 18 months of what I said, it's going to hit you, and you'll get all of whatever 2 hours times 90 weeks would be, that you'll get it and aha. But then you might also note that's not the end, because 2 days later, you've forgotten all about it. Because at the level, at the ordinary level at which everyone is drawn back to which that good old process of heating alloys, that everything is arranged to snap you back into place. This feeling of, I almost had some kind of major breakthrough last week, and now I feel like my head is full of gravel. It is not demons, and I know many of you, I get notes, and some of it I can see it on your face. I don't go around and sympathize with you, and even when you write me a note, you notice you do not get back sympathy. It is a process that is preordained. It gets faster and faster. I can assure you of that. But a feeling as though I was on the verge of something great, or I did have an experience that, as far as I'm concerned, what little I glimpsed, what little I can recall of that whole sensation, I'm here for the duration. But that notwithstanding, the last 2 weeks has just been like I was paying off a debt. That in some way life elasticized itself, and it allowed me to get a glimpse of something, and now it's going to make me pay a price. There is some reality to that, but it's not on the basis of some kind of mathematical karma, and it's not on the basis that life particularly is going to single you out, and for every little bit you see, it's going to knock you back down. It appears to be that way. Some years back, When I was talking in a more, if you will, psychological manner, I pointed that out to people. I'm pointing out to you now, it is a physical fact. The whole ideas that I have so often referred to, and to which so many of you were oftentimes attracted in the past, of the idea of an instant enlightenment. Well, instant and once and for all. That I will see it and that's it. That apparently happens in life, but it does not happen to people like you. You're in the wrong place. Because the people that apparently happens to, that's the end of it. And then you're stuck with having to write a book. But things are arranged in such a way that apparently you get some glimpse of something that's beyond real description, that you can fully taste that there is reality to this or what I've said, and then there is reality to the payoff of effort that you make, even though you cannot necessarily find a direct causal relationship of why this experience happened. I was not doing anything exceptional. I was changing a tire and getting rather pissed in the process, and suddenly, it's like the last 6 months suddenly hit me. But the process to which I was referring, and to point out to you how difficult it is to be understated, as I am always wont to be, that you get a glimpse of this, that whatever's going on, me hearing the news, me hearing that the Russians are rattling sabers again, me hearing that half the citrus industry in Florida has been wiped out, me hearing of a home burning down, all of this, my internal voices apparently react to in one way. I may feel great sympathy, or I may feel that life is unjust, that this is some kind of singular phenomenon happening to humanity, that the way the Russians are acting, or the way this group of religious zealots in one part of the country or world is acting, is proof that humanity is not only perhaps singular, they are singularly insane. And the whole process that no one has ever questioned up until now, not in the way in which I am presenting it to you, that this is not in some way separate from tornadoes, floods, earthquakes, warthogs running for their life. That the things that seem to be singular phenomenon happening in the great world of humanity, it all is turned into biochemical activity in you. As you get a glimpse of that, you might also note, or I will note for you since I brought it up, the kinds of things in so-called mystical literature, mystical mythology that has been hanging around for thousands of years. So-called Zen schools, to be a prime example, just to use the way in which it is translated into everyday English. That the world out here, they attribute it to Buddha, and you can find it in other parts of the world. That world doesn't actually exist. The only thing that exists is your perception of it. And there has been, without me counting them, hundreds, if not thousands, of pamphlets, books, commentaries delivered over the last 6,000 years on that idea, because it strikes people, certain people, that even more yellow-circuited philosophers have gotten into that, in some way trying to prove, trying to theorize in a way that they could offer some persuasion at least, that the way consciousness works, the way the mind works, really belies any great interest or any debate over what kind of world is out here, because in a sense it doesn't exist unless you perceive it. And through all the ways it's been presented just on that basis, many people have vibrated very sympathetically to that. The feeling of Maybe the first time they run across the idea, it might be stronger than It may be And of course, 5 minutes later, it's time to go to work, or they discover indeed they do have a flat tire and it's all gone. But there is a scientific basis for it. What they were perceiving, the kind of information life was putting out, even in Buddha's time, for instance, was a fact. But nowadays, that sort of map, for one thing, it's too old. And for one thing, now there's additional information available. There's the At the same time, there's the additional level of consciousness of humanity, rather than just saying, all right, the world out here, you can't even really say it exists. It's your perception of it. Fine. Then you're left, if you're pursuing something that was not simply presented as a yellow circuit activity, you're left with a kind of feeling of like, well, I still don't understand the nature of justice. I don't understand why things operate like they do. And so no matter what it was called after that, you're left, in a sense, with faith that the idea sounded good. It is my perception of things. But my perception of this particular instance is there is total destruction, injustice at work, and other people agree with me. So there are people who have a similar perception of this. Now, something is either wrong out there, or you're going to say that a large segment of our populace here, of our community, is wrong in our perception, and we're all fairly sane, stable people. It is not just a philosophical, not just a pseudo-mystical fact, that what goes on out there, outside of your senses, does not exist, literally. You are not conscious of it in any manner whatsoever. You cannot react to it. You cannot think about reacting to it until it is turned into biochemical activity in your brain. And so it doesn't matter what it is called out there. It becomes chemistry. If the molecular structure of your brain, if the neural activity going on is not altered, then what went on out there, it matters not what it's called, it matters not what it smells like, what color it is, how tall it is, whether you agree with it or not. Now, I want to get into more specifics about where many people at certain times are finding their sensation of what they are, and the kind of altered direction I was talking about that I have already started. I mentioned some weeks back in response to a couple of questions and what I already felt, pointing out to you that some of the feelings that some of you were experiencing, that you felt without sufficient energy, that you felt as though at times you were losing everyday energy. At that time, on 2 occasions, I gave you a generalized response in that what you felt in the past had been ordinary energy. Motivation, I whipped the term on you that was like dream energy. And as you began to find yourself separated from that being your prime motivation, that I in some way am going to be a famous guitarist, I'm going to be a famous author. I've had that dream. 12 or 13, I can recall I've had that feeling. I know I'm not there yet, and I'm getting a little long in the tooth, but the dream is there. But you pursue this enough, and if, indeed, I'm not going to describe it in any greater detail, that if that energy was not really part of your basic biochemical structure, if it was almost something that seemed to be running your public voice, then you do indeed lose that. And hence my continuing injunction to everyone to pursue any hobby that you seem to really have. Just don't look at it as being in conflict with this at all. If it was stamp collecting, shoe repair, folk dancing, penmanship, if you find something that you seem to have a real interest in, which I've defined for you several times, that you can do without an audience. If you've got that, I don't care what it is, don't look at it as in some way being in conflict with this, or looking at it as being so beneath this kind of great effort that I should abandon it. Nay. But everyone finds, whether they analyze it in a specific area or not, that they begin to go through periods and they feel as though I don't really have enough energy to get up every day and live the ordinary life that I've lived in the past. Semicolon. That was to bring it up to what I was going to pursue a little further tonight. all of you should get some kind of glimpse of what I'm about to say. Some of those feelings, and some others that none of you have had words to ask me about, is based upon the difference, the continuing difference between action and thinking about action. And in one sense, for the last 3 years, there has been more thinking about action than action. Most weeks, at least since you newer people have been here, I have given some sort of task. We put on the public meetings of Evotech. We had our periodic running of classes that had you people teach, that somebody that had a particular talent would teach classes here. But there grows in all of you, without you being able to analyze it necessarily, and it has grown in this as a whole, of almost the point that you can begin to feel a kind of even new level frustration on the difference between acting and thinking about acting. Well, some of you are getting glimpses already. Can you follow that what I've been threatening with these new cities and to start continual activity, and me saying that I cannot go through this with any other group of people that I have with you? It's going to become more a matter from common observation that this is almost action in toto. But now let me get you to pursue several things. Whenever this pops up in life, and we'll go back and use our grand examples of the kind of ordinary spiritual heroes that humanity believed they have had or still had. The founders of the world's major religions, just what you may know from your own religion, from other religions, what were they based on? If you had to divide it up into, it was a religion, it was an idea, a system of ideas, were they leading to action or thinking about action? Has anybody come up yet with this? Have you gotten this far? That they all are both. They're combinations. Now, ordinary consciousness could look back. Now, I'm sure that there must have been ordinary historians by now that have made such distinctions. I could pick out, for instance, I could say, from one view, that Buddhism, if we consider that a religion, would have been more a body of taught responses to the biochemical changes out here, the apparent environment, the apparent out there. It was more a taught response, a collective taught response by this man Buddha, if he existed, of thinking about action. And from that same kind of viewpoint, which none of this is limited to the viewpoint I am arbitrarily picking out for my example, is that Islam, compared to Buddhism, would be a body of teaching ideas that led to direct action. But once it survives long enough, which of course those two have survived, it is a combination. It was a combination at the time. But I wanted you to try and see that from a certain view, from a certain kind of description, which I did not elaborate to the point of nausea, that you could superfluously look at some of the religions as one of them being a body primarily leading to a response of thinking about action, whereas compared to that, you could call another religion a system of teachings that seem to primarily lead to direct action in response to what's going on out there. There comes upon everyone involved with this, that came upon the people in the past, that it reaches a point, and I don't mean out in the widespread area, Because when you reach that view that I was just using as my arbitrary example of those religions, once they had a large effect, what I'm talking about was then past. But the original group of people, Buddha and his, whatever it was, 7 or 8 little monks that followed him around for a few years, or Muhammad and his couple of brother-in-laws and his wife, and a few cousins. Once it got past that point is when the example, and what I'm about to point out to you further, with the immediate instant example I gave, begins to break into the sections where it can be seen as being both action and thinking about action. But there comes a point that we have hit it, you collectively have hit it, of almost a feeling at times of impotence. It feels as though at times I can understand, without any doubt, more about what's going on in life than anyone I know, except probably you know who. But as far as you know, it's me and you. And yet, things continue to run in a certain course, not only in your life, but oftentimes you're looking outside your life, and it seems as though something should be done about this. And yet one voice said, oh, wait. And it either conjures me up, my words, or it conjures up your own interpretation of my words and some of my maps. That, well, this is the way things is. Nobody can help what's going on. And yet it feels like something should be done. To use this division of humanity, and it is a fair division for a while. They're all arbitrary, they're all temporary maps, but there is no way out of this one. That everyone is either responding to what's going on, their automatic response. They're either responding by acting, whether it be right this second, or whether we spoke about in general, they were inclined to act. Or you're responding to what's going on by thinking about action. And what little I mentioned about the temporary apparent sound of the blue circuit about feeling about it, and I'll mention a little more about that, but still the two divisions hold. You've got no other choice. And you're the only creature. A dog, no matter how much we may love them, and you talk to him, and he looks at you with certain words, a dog can do one thing and one thing only. He can act in response to what's going on. That's it. Every other creature of which you can be aware, that's it. Whatever happens, they only have one possible response. That's action. Now, quite properly, you could point out in words that the singularity of humanity, or his oft-heralded crowning glory, is simply in he has an alternative. That he can, instead of acting, instead of his own biochemical processes acting in response to what seems to be out there, he can do nothing as far as acting, and he can think about action. And not move a muscle, not even speak about it. Because talking about it is acting. But he can stand or he can sit, and something can happen. And his organism is aware of it. And it does respond. He may stand there motionless. But there is a biochemical reaction, a rearrangement of the molecular and neural structure in him to what's going on, and his response is thinking about acting. It's thinking about actual motion. It's not thinking about thinking. It's not thinking about feeling. As I mentioned last week, it shouldn't sound tricky, but it is another fair description of that which has been necessary in man being an open-ended system here, and that what we call the life of man, the inventions, the technology, the arts, anything that is singularly related to man would not happen if man only had one reaction. We would still be out there fighting for space with warthogs, literally. that nothing that seems to be derived from humanity on any level, from sports, architecture, literature, music, religion, it would not be possible unless man had the alternative instead of reacting. That is, instead of having motion and action in response to what is going on, he has the alternative of no action whatsoever, but thinking about action. Now, both are absolutely necessary. Both are still going on. You could divide up humanity right now into those who act in general. Their primary molecular structure is arranged in such a way as to act in response to what seems to be out there. And we could divide the other people up into one great camp of those whose primary molecular and neural structure would seem to be a thinking about action in response to what seems to be going on out there. And of course, you know that that is not true. But then you can get down to the individual level. And you can say that this individual seems to have a primary structured response to act or to think about acting. And then within that, within you, which has got to get down to, you can see that there's both. And you can see without any kind of psychological training, and I've already given you enough information, that you can taste what they are. I've described it simple enough. You're either acting or you're thinking about acting. And if we have anyone still left here whose mental capacities can't handle that, you're either acting or you're thinking about acting, or else you're not aware of what's going on. But anything you can name, anything you read about, and it got your attention enough that you say, let me tell you what I read about, let me tell you what I heard about. Or if you just think about it, you just stand there and you think about it. That was one of only two possible responses. That's it. You either acted in response to it or you thought about acting. That goes on, but you can find, without any particular yellow circuit analysis, you can just taste that there are certain things can go on, certain types of people, certain situations that you react to. That is, you act in response. You just do. Once you get a glimpse, a taste of one of these, there'll be a whole string that'll just hit you. There are things that I simply, as I mentioned last week, my example, like the bricklayer that blurts out just anything, that they say, well, that man, don't ever invite him to a nice party. He'll get a couple of drinks and he'll turn around to somebody and say, hey, you old bat, how old are you? Or where'd you get that ugly dress? Or he'll go up to some guy, some important guy, and say, hey, hold on to that suit. It may come back in style someday. That kind of thing. All of you have got certain areas within your basic structure that there are situations, forget psychological descriptions, but there are situations going on out there where there's a certain kind of biochemical activity going on, and you get around that, and you would ordinarily identify it as, all right, certain kinds of situations, certain kinds of people I'm around. I can't seem to ever analyze what I'm going to do. I just open my mouth and it's just blah. And on the contrary, there are other kinds of situations, but your ordinary voices would try and describe it in some psychological way. I can be around people that seem to be my social superiors. I can be around people that seem to have more class than I do, more money. And I'm almost rendered motionless. If I go to a nice party and I realize, well, there's a man, we're talking $1,000 suit there, just everything, I can smell it. Here's a man, Ivy League, probably got a hyphenated name. Here's a man could buy and sell me, and that kind of person can turn around to me. I can be almost having a good time and kind of relaxing at a party, and they can turn around and say, pardon me, my good man, do you have the time? And I know I got to watch, and it's just that kind of thing almost freezes me. I'm almost incapable of immediate action in response to what's going on. So you have got, again, when I start out describing all of humanity in those two basic camps, you have it in you. Under ordinary conditions, that can't be changed. I could also refer you to what is referred to normally as mental illness, neuroses, phobias, fixations. was going to give a couple of seconds. Can any of you, a couple of you did, jumped right ahead. Can you see, just with a modicum of knowledge about so-called psychology, abnormal psychology, or things you may have feared about yourself in the past, that they could be quite properly placed in these kind of categories or analyzed in a certain non-linear fashion as people who have voices telling them, they have the molecular structure to want to act in certain situations, and they can't seem to act. Oh, they can think about acting. And under drugs or in analysis, they may talk about it. But everything that ordinary people that would describe as being my mental or my emotional problems, my kind of fixations, things that seem to be absolutely of an overwhelming nature to me, they could be analyzed in a certain way on this basis. That the person is either incapable of acting when their molecular structure on one of the voices is telling them they should act, or else they do act in a way that habitually seems to annoy them, or psychology would call self-defeating, and they simultaneously have one of the voices that is more structured to want to biochemically respond by thinking about action rather than pursuing the same action habitually over and over and over. Compulsive washing of hands. All these kinds of things. They could be seen. It wouldn't do an ordinary person any good to tell them this, but it could simply be seen that what you're doing, if they were involved with this, or if it was my lot to in some way suddenly bring about an abrupt change in everybody here on this planet, that all right, what you're doing, quit acting in that way and simply think about acting. Next, and your case is, quit thinking about acting. Don't give me those stories about it's tied to your mother and you keep having the same daydreams over and over. Forget it. Listen real close, and there's another voice. Every time this comes up, you want to do something. Like every time somebody seems to be your social superior says, hey, do you know what time it is? There's a voice in you that you can't quite hear that wants to say, can't you afford a watch? Or else it wants to say, hey, yeah, I got that time. How you like that jewel, huh? On sale at Kmart, or whatever it is. I could tell the person, act. If you could get in touch with that part of your own biochemical structure, it is talking about acting, and you say, well, I'm just rendered almost impotent, helpless, immobile. But there's another voice saying act. And if you would act, that'd be the end of your mental illness, as you call it. All right, what I'm still trying to, or will move in closer to, is there comes a time, and it has reached this, that you have got to act. I've got to act. This whole thing has got to move into an apparent world of acting. I said we would not forever be, or even on a continuing basis, sitting here on Thursday night. I did not mean I was just going to absolutely stop it. But this, from one viewpoint, it was been much more than that, or you would have all wasted your time. None of you would be here. But there is a way in which you can feel continuously, and I'm aware of it, that I feel as though I'm on the verge of actually being able to do something astounding. Yeah, I know you kept telling us, you can't walk on water and you can't fly through there, and that's not the point. But I still feel like I could do something astounding. And you keep wanting to ask questions. Isn't there some way I could help my mother? She seems to be driving herself crazy. Or I have people at work, they don't annoy me as much as they used to, but they're driving themselves crazy. There's nothing but hostile gossip. And I believe I have some glimpse of the fact that this is all running in a quite mechanical fashion, and things are not going downhill, and it's just the way it should be, but I still feel as though something could be done. I could stick my finger here in the machinery somewhere and have some effect. That if this were an isolated example of what life is doing, if this single frame snare of the movie of life were true, then this one instance is not really helping anybody. If I was going to isolate this one thing with my mother, or this one thing with these people with whom I work every day, this is not, without any doubt, and I'm not saying I just would disagree with your observation of it, this one instance, or this continuing, movable, suffering feast of these people, this cannot be anything resembling a finalized or even a wide-angle statement, a wide-angle view of the constructive, progressive nature of life. Therefore, isn't there something? Could I say something? Could I do something? And maybe just somebody, just shake them for a second, maybe they go, or surely. Isn't there some kind of magic even available? I cannot go back through, it's too late. It's not simply my opinion, but from the kind of divisions I've been drawing for you tonight, again, compared to action as opposed to thinking about action. And you realize these Thursday night meetings, notwithstanding the task and other things we've done, if I had to pick one of the two, the obvious one is this is thinking about acting. It's not a fair description for this, but it would be, left with those two possibilities, it would be that. But now, what is going to appear to be in public, outside of you people and a few others in the other cities that I may still deal with on that basis, it's going to appear to be action as opposed to thinking about action. But then let me present you with this. What kind of action? I can't resist going back again and pointing out that everyone believes that if stories of the great prophets and people talking to gods were true, then of course gods knew exactly what they were doing. And I've tried to push you around corners and slide you under bridges in several directions to make you get a glimpse of the fact that even if it were true, that there was some organism outside, extrinsic from all of this system that went poof and invented it, created it, it does not know exactly what it's doing. Or brought down closer to a precise level today, me talking about life itself, being alive and being conscious, and having every manifestation that an individual has, but in another dimension, on another scale. Again, ordinary consciousness, even if it took that as being a hypothetical, or some new philosophical notion, it would still follow that if that be true, then life knows exactly what it's doing, and I tell you again, it does not. And the proof is everywhere. You don't have to just come here and listen to me. Once you hear it, and if it strikes any notion, the proof is just absolutely everywhere. So, for me to present you with a question that's time to act, that always reaches this point with this sort of thing, and then to say what kind of action, then you would think, well, if life has told me all this in some way, and life has got me doing this, it's been some kind of process that I've taken you through, sort of by stages it would appear, looking backwards. And I say it's time to act, and life has, told me, all right, here's what we're going to do, or here's what you're going to do, and get those people to do. It's not the way it works. But it doesn't talk in words anyway, and it doesn't know exactly what to do. But it knows when it's time to act. What have I been describing off and on for the last 45 minutes? And you. Well, this has all been real meaningful, and sometimes I feel like I'm about to explode and maybe shoot into outer space, at least up here. And then at other times I feel just impotent and helpless. I'm bound up in some invisible set of chains, and I want to do something. What should I do? What makes you think life's any better off than you are? That it's time to do something. For many of you, how many, I didn't take a vote, but how many were delighted when you began to hear in the last couple of weeks when I said, all right, the time of real action. A change of course has come. If I'd said, who's in favor? But not everyone. And somebody went, yes, yes. All right, so what? Life's already said that. So I ask you, all right, what? And you think, well, you should know. Or life should know. Why? But it definitely has a feeling that it is time to act. Well, let me play with history just a bit. Let me point out to you that some of what has gone on in the past is no longer possible. things the Jews went through, to take that historically. The prime example that I was going to point out a certain aspect, though, I assume all of you have enough passing knowledge for me to use it, is Muhammad and Islam. And throughout the years, I made little references here and there about him, in a sense, working with a do-or-die method, finding those who are now referred to as heathens, that is, people who had not heard of him, or if they had heard of him, decided they didn't like it, and him and his friends came into town and said, if it had watches, they'd say, look, we're in a hurry, and they put a scimitar up to everyone's throat and says, you've got 2 seconds to either become a Muslim or die. 1, 2, and it was just surprising. In a short length of time, the large numbers of people who just suddenly saw the light. That, well, I'll be damned. Nobody ever put it to me that way, and I believe, yes, I will be. I'm a Muslim. You can count on me. I have made those apparent kinds of jokes, as most of you have heard before tonight, that same kind of thing. But can you begin to follow it in a slightly different way? It's not just a joke. And I'm not saying that what history says went on is either true or false exactly. It's unimportant. I'm using it again, as always, in my own way. But let's just take parts of it. That a man apparently involved with some aspect of this. A man certainly, if the man existed as he's named and described, a founder of a now mechanical religion, the center of it, a man who even said that gods were speaking to him. A short time after that he revealed to a few people that angels, messengers from gods, have been talking to me, and somebody get a pen over here and write this down. And he starts talking. He fills up 2,000 or 3,000 pages. And there's a group of people that listen to it and are astounded at their time and place, were as astounded and captivated and touched by it as the best of you have been by me being here. Time and place, different nationality, everything. But it touched them. But a short time after that, he and his in-laws and his then small band of followers were on horseback, swords in hand, and apparently undertaking an absolutely impossible, meaningless task on several levels. One is of him saying, well, Allah told me to get the whole world to become Muslims. All right. That's impossible. And it didn't have that many people. They couldn't live that long. Ordinary consciousness would have told many people even then that that may sound great, but there's nothing resembling that has ever come close to occurring on this planet. So it could be discounted on that basis. The other basis is, one of the other bases is, if the man understood anything, he also understood this can't be exported. So what if I run over, what if I get into Germany? What if I get into Italy, and I do the same thing I've been doing over here with the Jews and some of the other peoples here that are related to us, more or less our same culture. If I got here and I get somewhere else, let's assume I can pull the same stunt. Run into town, pull the swords and say, got 2 seconds to convert. And they'll go, yes, we do. If he understood anything, he knew that you can't export this. So it was meaningless on that level. And of course, if he understood anything at all of you should have some guess as to the fact that converting somebody by holding a sword to their throat or get them to say, I see the light, you might as well get them to say, I'm Donald Duck's nephew. On that level, there's not that much difference. And so he had to have understood that. But he took his band of people, then it began to expand, and some of those that were drawn into it mechanically, or some of those that were drawn into it by swords at their throat, then without any doubt eventually heard something. Not just the action, then they began to be able to think about the action of life. They began to think about the action of what he apparently was doing. They began to be able to think about the action in which they apparently had participated along with him. In other words, then they sort of became part of the inner crowd. What they undertook, let me repeat, I shouldn't have to do this, because we've got newer people around. I am in no way giving any sort of lesson whatsoever. I'm not making any comment on Muhammad or Islam. All of you should know that, and you newer people have any doubt, All I can do is tell you again. It's just me using maps so we've got some common language. It doesn't matter whether any of this is true or not. It matters whether this is true. It doesn't matter whether it was true, anything you have imagined or read about Muhammad, or whether I've changed it all around, or whether, in fact, it was incorrect to start with and I'm telling you the right way. It's all irrelevant. But he acted, and he undertook, apparently, he undertook an absolutely futile and meaningless crusade. So what? That does not mean that there is nothing possible that a person can do or that a group of people can do. But when you start moving into an area wherein it seems to be more action, left of those, or using those two divisions again, of either acting or thinking about acting, when you move into the area that something apparently, if you had to name it, is moving into action, you are talking about then that which by appearances is either meaningless or futile. That is from the viewpoint of the person leading it and those inside who understand anything. To what you apparently say you're going to attempt is meaningless from the way I see it now. It's ultimately meaningless, or if it's not meaningless, it's impossible. It's a futile effort. We won't get anywhere. But the obvious, the reason I wrote up the example of Muhammad, the obvious way in which to act is to apparently, this group of people, try and put your hands on the physical, the literal, the social, the political, the economic, but usually what people would refer to nowadays as political. It's that group to try and put their hands on the political, the existing political structures of their immediate environment and to rearrange it. Back then it was in the name of Allah says that things are unjust. We have whole families here who are blood related. We're killing each other. You're killing each other. We're having 247 different idols and different gods. You know, fuck all this. I've talked to the real God. He talked to me, and we got to stop this. I know he talked to me. He told me exactly what he wanted. And I'm telling you people. And he tried it for, I forget what history says, a few months or a couple of years. And he had just a resounding degree of indifference displayed by those who heard about him or heard his message. And so he said, all right, this is the way it appeared. All right, if that's the way you want it, forget me talking to you. I told you what God wanted. If you're not going to listen, here I come. Look for us. We'll be in your town soon. Tell your friends and neighbors. We will be there, and at that time, I believe we will have a different kind of presentation to offer you people rather than this word of mouth of you hearing about me and sending back messages when I say, you know, I send out word, I send a messenger over to such and such tribe or such and such village. You know, do you believe? And the messenger comes back that all you people got together. The mayor said, we'll be in your town soon, and I believe that you may have a different response. I went through all of this. I'm not trying to hint anything to you. We're not about to try and overthrow the government. Not, well, wait a minute, before you laugh. Not because there would be anything morally wrong with that. The thing is, it's too late for that. It won't work anymore. And this directly going out and being able to put your hands on the political structures as the way to act, well, just look around. If I could do it, that'd be the obvious one. But it's too late. Things are not arranged that way. Now, if we wanted to look at it as an absolutely meaningless and futile gesture, but you could not do it directly. We could not take all of us and everybody that I would consider to be serious in New York and the West Coast and Florida and anywhere else in the world, people I know, brought them all together here, and we armed ourselves to the teeth. Bandoleros, and we all, each of us had 244 Magnums, and we rushed the state capital of Georgia or anywhere. I mean, this great siege of, what, 150 people, armed to the teeth, looking wild-eyed, and me at the head of it. How long are we going to last? Let's be realistic. I'd give us maybe, well, until the squat squad. I was afraid I'd do that because I used to know a guy that was a member of the team here, and I used to call him that. By the time they could get out the SWAT squad, 15, 20, or 30 minutes, we'd be done for. So me saying it's not possible, I mean on a quite logistical and realistic physical basis. Not because there'd be anything wrong with it, because if it was good enough for Muhammad and circumstances were right. The circumstances were different, that would be an absolute area to consider. But it is logistically, it is physically, and always it is impossible under our conditions. But that has been in the past. And you could also see it, I don't mean to limit it even historically, just to Muhammad. You could see a piece of that in Moses, in the so-called story of the Jews. You can see it some in the story of Jesus and Christianity, and in a slightly different way you could see it with Buddha, but it begins to break down when you can take what goes on in the East at that time into what is the Western development of human consciousness. But it was always a matter of going out there with the immediate environment, because there's always, is what I've been trying to get you to see on a personal level all these last months, there is the immediate reaction in everyone's individual organism that things out here are amiss, to say the least. There is much, much room for improvement. Everyone feels that individually, and you can take a group of people. And no matter where you are, no matter what the time was, no matter what the community was, and look right around and say, listen, as fast as I could talk, I could name you ways that would improve the quality and the nature of life for everyone here if only these things were done just as fast as you could talk. But the circumstances are such now that you cannot go out there politically. And in that I include economically, socially. That you cannot go out there right now and do what a Muhammad did. You cannot take a group of people and secede from the United States. Or you cannot declare war on the state of Georgia or the government of the United States and expect to last over 15 or 20 minutes. That has always been a quite acceptable, consistently used approach when this gets down to the area of acting. Then, as you might note, as everything else, once it passes a certain level and it becomes part of the ordinary flow of life in general, such as a thing becomes a religion, the thing of Moses or the thing of Jesus then becomes Judaism or Christianity. Then note, on the contrary to it ever being in conflict with the environment, for it to stay there, it has to become part of the world of Caesar, as Jesus put it. It can no longer be in direct conflict. It can no longer be the social critic, the political critic of the environment. That only happened while Muhammad was alive, while Jesus was alive, while Moses was alive. And they were in direct conflict once they started going outside this small group of people. Once it started moving out publicly, it announced, directly or indirectly, its opposition, that its general structure, its ideas, the way in which it was planning to act, was in direct opposition to much of what was going on out here, to political and economic structures. But for it to survive, how soon was it? A prime example, until the Catholic Church, until Christianity, well, historical reports for a period of several hundred years, was probably the primary political power on this planet. It didn't have to worry about accommodating itself. It didn't have to worry about being in opposition. It was it. I ask you again, if it's time to act, what would you say to life? Right? What is it that could be done today. When I was talking about religions and the way in which everyone has these two camps within your own biological structure of either wanting to respond, part of the structure is already being arranged in such a way that the molecules themselves, your own biochemical process, they're parts of it, is built in such a way. It's according to which one is the strongest in you. But a part of everyone's structure is built in such a way as to want to react, to respond like a bricklayer. That is the feeling of, I've had enough of this damn discussion. I want to do something, I don't care if it's wrong. The world's driving me crazy, you people are driving me crazy, my business is driving me crazy, my family drives me nuts. I turn on TV and here's a bunch of intellectuals talking about, well, we have today a panel of 12 people and we're going to discuss what to do about hunger. Hell, either feed people or shoot them. What good's it going to do? Every week I turn on, or I read the paper, if that kind of person read that much, is year in and year out, state, federal governments appoint blue ribbon committees to investigate hunger. And I read down there, the committee members are receiving $80,000 a year to meet once a month for 5 hours. They don't give me that crap. Take that money and feed some people. Everyone has that in them. It is not simply a type of person. When I was dividing it is to investigate hunger. And I read down there, the committee members are receiving $80,000 a year to meet once a month for 5 hours. They don't give me that crap. Take that money and feed some people. Everyone has that in them. It is not simply a type of person. When I was dividing up arbitrarily that you could look at humanity as being either those that want to respond molecularly by acting or by thinking about acting. As always, you have them both in you, and parts of the circuitry is arranged inalterably. And it's the basis of one of the voices that I mentioned last week at the public and the private voices, is to want to respond by acting. That's tied into the parts that want to think about acting. Because as always, I remind you, the circuits cannot be simply separated. They're all exchanging information. But there is a part within everyone, within the molecular structure, that it wants to respond by simply acting. There's nothing to talk about. It's foolish to talk. What good does it do to talk about people going hungry? What good does that do? It's act. Then there is a part, at least of everyone sitting here, part of everyone on this planet by now, that the structure that seems to be oneself, the molecular structure, that there is a part of it in the higher circuitry. It is a newer part, relatively speaking and literally speaking, that has the alternative. Rather than to act, the people are hungry. We got X amount of money. The government, in fact, will pay me $80,000 a year for 2 years to serve on this. I don't need the money. These other people don't need. I can give $80,000. How many people would that feed? How many people do they figure starving on this planet? Or if I feed X number of people for X number of months for $80,000, then what? No, we've got to have some plans. It's not going to do any good just to grab all the money we can get our hands on right now and run out in the streets and holler, who's hungry? And give away the money, because when we give it away, and then what? People are still hungry. No, that's not the answer. We have got to have some kind of plan. Some way the human mind can come up with plans, projects, structures to actually attack this problem. There's a way in which you could draw, or I could, and some of you should be able to get a glimpse of it, you could draw a definitive profile of what seems to be your own I on the basis of how much, to what kind of apparent conditions, and which is the strongest of those two basic molecular arrangements within you, the one that wants to act and the one that wants to think about acting. There's a way in which I could draw you a 2, 3, and even 4-dimensional profile that would be you, that would be any individual. And vis-a-vis religion, and a rhetorical question I sort of threw out 15 minutes ago when I said religions do go through a period that apparently would be thinking about acting if it could be seen correctly, and then apparently going into acting. How about this? Let's take the 10 Commandments. I assume everyone knows them as well as I do. Do you realize that some of them concern action and some concern thinking about action? Thou shalt not steal. But you find that in all religions. Every culture has some so-called spiritual dictum, thou shalt not steal. That is a response to action. That is a directive concerning action. But also within the 10 Commandments is, thou shalt not have any God before me. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's possessions, which it differentiates from thou shalt not steal it, because that's action. Or thou shalt not kill. And then I'm not sure it's one of the 10 Commandments, but somewhere it's pointed out that Jesus or someone pointed out that if you kill somebody in your mind, it's the same as killing them, which at line level consciousness doesn't make any sense. But it's directives, without any particular knowledge or understanding of it back then, that part of them are aimed at action, the behavior of people, and there was already an unrealized awareness of the fact that there is another world going on. It's not just the actions of people that will affect them. It is their thinking about action. And so you tell people, don't steal your neighbor's goods. Don't even think about stealing them. Not if you're really going to be a good Jew or Christian or whatever. But you can't do either. Or how about another one? Since everyone, all would-be mystics like to play with the idea of some form of retribution, about thou shalt reap what thou shalt sow, which some form of that permeates every part of the world. At the ordinary level, can you remember that you can never find any justice to that, any realization of that, although with many, many people on this planet, they hear it and it's like a tuning fork going off and they sympathetically vibrate like, yes, how true, how true, how true, how true. And yet, if that be true, how do you explain the fact I tried to do good? I could name you instance after instance. I named one just happened yesterday is what brought it to mind. I tried to do good, and today my car blew up. Sounds like one people heard something or suspected something. You know what that does not take into account on the surface? Not the action, but what it does not take into account is the thinking about the action. I did the act. I saw somebody that needed a favor, an elderly woman with a flat tire, and I was in a hurry, and I stopped. I got my hands greasy. I even tore a hole in my new suit, changing that tire for her. She didn't even thank me when I left, and as I was pulling out of traffic after doing that, a truck hit me. So my good action, that's what I sowed, and it's happened to me many times. I sowed good action, and I did not reap it. But what that phrase does not take into account at the ordinary level of consciousness is what was the thinking about action going on in that person? What was the other voice? And on that basis, there's always a truth till you reap what you sow. But it's mathematical, it is scientific. It is a chemical formula in action. Because it should say, you shall reap whatever you sow on both levels. Both have got to be taken into account, not only your actions that you sowed, but your thinking about action. Do I have to get any cruder? Well, I was thinking about how much this woman will probably appreciate what I'm doing. No, she won't. Fuck, I just ripped my pants. Who's going to pay for it? She won't even notice it. Or if she did, is she going to offer to pay for how my pants fixed? No. You remember the last time I stopped to fix somebody's tire? They got mad because I lost one of the lugs nuts off of there. It rolled under the car or something, and the old woman got mad at me. And so within a period of just like that, there you are changing the tire, start off as doing a good deed, and you go ahead and finish it, and the old lady may go, well, thank you, sir. But the thinking about action, the other voice, is never taken into account. It's not taken into account in the horizontal dictums and proverbs of life. There is something specifically I want to point out. Within everyone, no matter the right now, let us say that all of you could fairly correctly identify yourself if I said at line level, under ordinary conditions, would you consider yourself a person who your primary biochemical structure, it seems to be you, that its primary response to what seems to go on out there seems to be one of wanting to act? Raise your hand. Let's assume everyone that raised their hand would be a fair observation. Now, it's all right, the rest of you feel as though your primary response, you're just your own biochemical makeup inside. When things happen, now that I put it to you this way, the rest of you, then it seems like that you're more inclined to respond by thinking about acting as opposed to just some immediate action. And those who didn't raise their hand, let's assume you all went yes. And let's assume that was a fair observation. Comma. Then the action-phased biochemical structures, when they are activated from biochemical activity out here, if they're activated enough to want to act, and then the thoughts of acting are also going on, and they seem to be even weighing possible ramifications of what my acts will do, possibly even seem to be thinking about things related to this, such as, well, it can't be helped what's going on, or I could do more harm than good, or I could just waste my time. I could waste my time and even upset things more. And let us say that the latter seemed to be your public voice. That is the voice that had your attention, that seemed to be speaking and controlling your response. That you do nothing and you think about it. Not think in ordinary sense, remember, if I'm using on the basis that the organism's only two possible responses is either to act or to think about acting. And you seem to be involved with the latter. And that the voice talking would seem to be correct. But based upon what I understand, based upon an analyzation of what's going on, I might do more harm than good. I might at least waste my time, at the very least. But it's quite possible that the situation would get even more disruptive if I acted. No matter how civilized, no matter how educated, no matter what might be from one viewpoint, the propriety of going with the voice, thinking about action rather than action, no matter how extant all that may be, those conditions, it can still leave a person when that molecular structure, that part of the system, that its immediate response was to act, and you do not, then under many, many conditions, a continuing situation, no matter what's going on in the thinking about action, you can be left feeling everything from angry to frustrated, to impotent, to gagged and bound. And yet, the higher end of the circuitry, the physical, biochemical thinking about action and the situation going on and pondering the kind of actions that would be possible for you to take right now, and it stops action, they have the primary voice, no matter that from one view it could have apparently been quite proper, it was probably the best possible thing to do at the time was to do nothing, you can still, and it happens to everyone, not just here, but out in life, even worse, or better, less worse, that no matter how proper the lack of action seemed to be, that action-phased biochemical structure within your total organism, the lower circuitries, the older circuits, they can cause even get up into your higher circuits. So whatever I failed to do, the way I did was not right. It is, let me jump right quick, not enough of you are following it or feeling this. Out in ordinary life, forget this for a second. Out in ordinary life, this is a running disease. It's a plague from one viewpoint. Not just out there, but in all of you at the ordinary level. You remember it's been a few months ago, I threw it out, and I think I even let Kyrute play with it once, about the idea of being two types of men on the sidewalk, and here comes some guy, and he hollers, out of the way. Nobody hardly remembered it when I did it then. I guess I shouldn't have looked for much more tonight, should I? Yes, I did. Energy is being transferred. Necessary energy is being transferred by the biochemical process of responding in a human with action, or by the organism responding by thinking about action. But since I pointed out, as far as verbally maps can hold up, that is the two and the only two possibilities. Then can you get any sense of what ordinary people and what you at ordinary level think of as being very pressing personal problems, psychological problems, spiritual quandaries in which humanity is immersed, is based upon that conflict. It's a necessary conflict, but it is not recognized. It is recognized on other cruder levels and called by spiritual names, by psychological descriptions, and it is a biochemical process. It is different ends of the nervous system, one older, one lower, one newer, both of them necessary, but anytime I can point out to you, even temporarily, that things can be properly divided into two, usually I make a joke about it, but if I tell you, and you've had a week, have another week, find me an exception. There is none. That's the only two things the organism can do. Anytime you've got two possibilities, you've got trouble. You understand I'm being funny. In the consciousness of humanity, you've got an immediate world of trouble. You don't even have to live in River City, but you've got trouble. There is a time in which action cannot be replaced by anything. And if I had started talking in this way, and if I go much further tonight, a few months back, and some of you newer people that are hearing this after just a few months of exposure, it may sound jarring, but all the things about not being hostile, all the things about not returning anger, there comes a time when that's thinking about action. There comes a time when a person's got to know what they're doing. And you cannot go out and fake it. There are very few of you here, and you could try it without getting captured by it. To when the idea that a person of superior understanding would turn the other cheek, I must tell you that there'd be times that if a person understood enough, he might dress somebody's head. He might lay somebody low. He might physically harm somebody seriously. And I am not hinting at all, you people can't go do that. And you can't hardly fake it. Notice I have had you go out for task and to smile for 24 hours, to pretend that you are interested and like people in whom you seem to have no intrinsic interest. Notice I have never given out a task to go out and pretend you're hostile. Has anybody ever noticed that? If so, did you keep waiting for it, or did something finally strike you? Because you can go out, and I can say as a task, I mean this absolutely, that everybody all day Saturday, or let's say for 2 hours even Saturday, from noon until 2, you have got to go out just in a shopping center and smile constantly and act cheerful. Everything you say, and I want you to talk as much as possible. Has got to be friendly, just passes by. Hello, how are you? Hey, what a nice dress. Go in the store and say, oh, a store full of candles. God, I love candles. I've never seen such beautiful candles. You must have a great personal life. There must be great satisfaction in having such wonderful candles as part of your environment. You can go do that, and when 2 o'clock rolls around, if you have to, you can apparently just shut it off. But you can't go out. I could not go tell you, all right, I want you to go out, and I want you to go in a shopping center. Forget all day, forget 2 hours. 20 minutes. Most of you take about 5. So what I want you to do is just the opposite. I want you, as soon as you hit in the shopping center, get in there at noon, best you can. Walk in there and start bumping into people. I mean, you bump and say, hey, watch it. And walk into the store and say, God damn, a store full of nothing but candles? What, are you fucking crazy? God, you have to be an idiot. Nobody's going to come here and buy. How much is that? $2 for a damn candle? God, you are nuts. Let me out of this place. And for me to say, now you're going to fake it. Just an act. All of you know by now, don't you? Well, there's 2 or 3 in you here that you might survive 20 minutes of it. But even those 2 or 3, or a handful, you know not to even fake that. Because you know that there are limits to it. You start faking that for 5 minutes and you're done for. You can't suddenly turn it off. I may tell you do it in 5 minutes and leave, and you might be able to leave, but you might back out the door after 5 minutes of it, still shouting at people from the parking lot. You know, you son of a bitch, come out here, and God damn you all. In 5 minutes, you might be able, if I told you go do it for 5 minutes at a shopping center and leave, at the end of 5 minutes, you might be able to leave. That is, you might be able to stop the action of it. But the thinking of the action of it, God, you'd be feeling it for days later. You'd be feeling it, most of you, in your public voice, days later. But, back to what I was saying. There comes a time that action can only be done under certain conditions. And that thinking of action is absolutely unacceptable, unsuitable, is unprofitable, and there is no way in which to teach. I cannot teach anybody this. If God himself, if life itself could put itself in a form and drop down inside of itself and say, all right, I'm here. I took a form, I'm going to talk to you people for a few minutes. What's the question? That was the question. Life couldn't tell you. Because look around, life does not know when to do it. It's more than a hit or miss game, but from certain viewpoints, to exaggerate it, which I have to try to get you to suddenly turn and look in one way, is it would appear that life is running in a hit and miss way. That suddenly some group of people seems to be overcome with great feelings of humanistic compassion, and then 2 years later, they're attacking their neighbors, this whole group of people, this nation, or this religion, this community. And of course, good old moi, that at times I'm just heartbroken to think about what's going on in life, to think about the injustice in all forms. And I could sit around and stay in my room and cry. Then inexplicably, I can get in the car and drive out to get a Coke, and 5 minutes later, I'm ready to fist fight somebody in the 7-Eleven store. It's not right or wrong. but there is life in action. That is the way in which things move. I said I'd mention a little bit about what would seem to be the emotions. You remember, everyone, how I've drawn the circuits in that two-dimensional drawing for all these months, of the red and then the blue and then the yellow. And them intertwined, and me pointing out that they were in constant communication, and in fact, even though they don't exist in that particular configuration, that there are points at which there is a primary transfer of information in those circuits. That is a fact. And that's what I tried to give a small hint last week. I'll try it one more time for some of you to pursue, is the basis. It's the kind of origin point. It is kind of the point where in a stereo system you'd finally have the speaker. At those juncture points is where the public and the private voice originate, is in a juncture point between the three circuits. But the blue circuit is like a mid-juncture. It is like a very small speaker. I mean, I'm talking about a little teeny-weeny 2-cent speaker. It's like a juncture point between the two voices, between the two ends of the older part of that biochemical arrangement that seems to be oneself, in the lower areas down the red circuit, and then what seems to be up here in the area that seems primarily involved with wanting to act in response to out there, and up here wanting to think about it. What seems to be one's feeling, I point out again, I hinted last week, and I'm not inclined to hint much more than I did, but it would seem as though you do have feelings. But note, or find a way, find an exception. What seems to be the feeling, is it over the action, or is it over the thinking of the action? Which is it? It's got to be one of the two. Does a warthog turn on a fox coming through the woods, or a wolf, when it hears a noise? Does it turn on it and gore it? And as soon as it does it, feel bad about it, or feel good about it? If you turn around and hit somebody that seemed to, in some hostile manner, just somebody came up and bumped you, and you suddenly turn around and hit them, and let's say you're trying to be a real spiritual person, but just there you stood and somebody bumped you, and suddenly the whole milieu, it seemed to be vibrations, the whole hostile atmosphere, and the way the guy looked was suddenly Bricklayer City for you, and you hit him. And let us say, ordinary words would have it something like this. This is a would-be spiritual person talking. I don't know why, I can't explain it, but there's something about the guy and the way it just happened on what I hit him, and as soon as I hit him, I felt terrible about it. Really? Wait a minute. The apparent feeling, was it over the action? Let's play history time here again. It's been a while since I mentioned this. Whoever made any sense when I used to point out or ask you to try it, that you could not be negative, you couldn't be hostile without thinking about it. I hit the guy, it was an act of hostility, of which I disapprove. It goes against everything I believe in, everything I try to live up to, and I hit him before I knew what I was doing. But as soon as I did it, just as soon as I did it, I felt terrible. I can tell you this. Let me give you a few seconds. I must say I was hoping for a little more, but when the organism, that is you, acted in response to the voice down here in the older circuits, the voice that cried out to act, and you responded to that voice. When you turn and hit that other person, the act did not make you feel bad. I don't care who you are. I don't care whether you were the Pope, Swami X. I don't care if you were the world's most famous pacifist. The act of hitting this other person, the molecules, the biochemical structure in you and those circuits that made you hit him, that you responded to and hit him, did not feel bad and cannot feel bad. Then the person says, as soon as it happened, I felt bad. Now we're getting somewhere. As soon as the information got up here, which is the last to know, or at least I can guarantee you this, it knows always later than does one's fist. Always. The fist moved, and the fist has no apology. The fist does not feel bad. The molecular structure in your lower circuits that was speaking and to which you responded by making this man's nose turn in a different direction, none of that ever felt bad and cannot feel bad about what it did. But then to say, as soon as I did it, let us clean up, let us make that person's conversation and description more precise. As soon as I was conscious of me doing it, which was always later than the action, always. My thinking about doing it made me feel bad. I felt bad about my thinking about my action. Now, we have a fair retelling of the way things are. But not the hitting. To the biochemistry of the older circuits, which is synonymous with the lower circuits, there is no morality. There is action, but there is no thinking of action. It finally gets all intertwined to some degree because they do not operate in any fashion in isolation. Therefore, whatever action you do, well, any action that reaches past a certain point of perception, the strength of it, you're going to think about it. Humanity at the ordinary level knows. You know, the terms, I do things without thinking about it. I make hand gestures and I don't think about it. I can drive a car and not think about it. But this biochemical process, as long as the yellow circuit's going, and we'll now assume everyone on this planet has one in operation, this thing is always thinking. That is, a chemical reaction, electrochemical reaction is always going on, even when you're laying down Betty by time. It is always going on. So it is always thinking about some action. But it is always after the fact. And for any smart aleck voices that might still be left here, don't say that it can think about the future actions. It can only think about future actions as they're reflected by its already past experience of prior actions. There's another basis, back where I started some of this, for feelings that some of you have, and some of it is based upon the kind of definitive profile I said I could have drawn of you originally. That some of you feel as though the ways in which you act in life have been decreased, have been warped, have at least been thwarted slightly by being involved with this. And it seems to be, at the higher end of the chemical process, it seems to be quite proper. I used to be very hostile. Just a couple of years ago, before I got involved with this and met you, somebody'd look at me funny, and it was fist time. And I always knew that wasn't right. His fist didn't know it. His older circuits didn't know it. But I always felt that wasn't right. And now being around you, I think I have more understanding about it. I've pondered the matter, and I'm not as inclined to hit people. But that part of the biochemical process of the person still has just as much energy. It does not get to exert itself, but it has the same inclination. It has the same built-in desire to respond as it did in the past. There is a certain way, I'm just going to leave this part at that, while trusting that none of you get involved with this for the time being or getting drowned by it. There are conditions, whether it be in the life of Moses, Muhammad, you, that nothing will suffice but action, absolute acting. Now, you cannot say that at the ordinary level of consciousness because that is what has happened. That is what happens out in the ordinary world. those whose primary structure is driven, the molecular structure is driven to act, they act. Those are driven primarily otherwise occurs. You have to have some understanding of it. You've got to understand beforehand. You've got to be able to think about the act. Of course, you're talking about going past the speed of light. But you've got to be able to think about it. You've got to be able to think about if I act, whether I do not act. And you've got to have some understanding of the ramifications. You've got to have some understanding that this may be meaningless, it may be futile. And then you've got to have some understanding about when a futile, a meaningless act may be proper. And it cannot be explained, because if I leave it at those words, it makes no sense. But it's beyond that. And that there are times that no matter how much you understand in the higher circuits, that no matter how sophisticated and civilized you may be, you will leave feeling as though I did not do that which I should. But don't look for some spiritual guilt. Do not look for some psychological trauma in your past that has set up this ambiguous situation in my psychology that pulls me this way and that in an unprofitable manner. You're talking about two different ends. You're talking about two different areas of your own biochemical structure, the thing that seems to be you. And the older parts respond as they were built to respond, with a desire to act. And that is the source of one of the two voices, usually. Well, it's always the source of one. I was just saying some of you already got a suspicion that it can shift around, which I tried to hint last week. But at any rate, that fuels one of the voices. Then at the higher, the newer end of the nervous system, of this biochemical process, this structure, its primary response is to think about acting. And it's not psychological, it's not spiritual, it is a biochemical process. It is biochemical processes out here, it is molecular, atomic activity out here that comes into your senses, and it is turned in to internal molecular activity in you, and it affects it up at this end in one way, and it affects it down here in another way, in the older sections. But the time comes that you must act. That was also sort of what I was hinting at 2 weeks ago, of saying that you're going to see people begin to react apparently to me differently. Of course, you can always say, well, you're acting different. But now you know that's the same fucking thing. Isn't it? Yeah. The blue circuit can apparently feel, but what I wanted to leave you with that one part was, is for you to look yourself. I already told you, but you've got to look for yourself. Does it feel, truthfully, about your organism acting? And everything in life, that is the ordinary level of consciousness, tells you yes. But I'm telling you it does not, and you can see it. Because the part, the biochemical process that can think about acting, only gets the information after the act is completed. The act is already done. And so you can say, all right, I feel bad about hitting that guy 5 minutes ago. I feel bad about hitting every son of a gun I've ever hit in my life. I feel bad about it now. I'm on a spiritual path. I've gone back to my religion, and I know I was wrong. I feel bad about it. I felt bad about it every time I did it, and it's not true. Part of the molecular structure that is now talking in this person, part of it, thought about the action and seemed to feel bad. It was like the mid-voice where I've drawn the blue circuit. And I remind you one more time, remember where the blue circuit, they all touch, but there were points where they all were touching, and I pointed out they were of a particular critical significance, and I never mentioned what. But it's as though where the blue circuit touches the red, and then when the blue touches the yellow, I'm suggesting to you, you might look as being a physical locale of where the two voices come from. But the voice that thinks about acting, and that seems to have a feeling about it, I suggest, or I challenge you, you look and see does that voice, do you have a feeling about any kind of regret, any kind of so-called emotion about the act at the time? That can be that you got into thinking about the act, and that prefaced that became the basis of some form of action. But you first thought about the act, then you've got a different situation. But if that older biochemical end of the molecular structure that we like to refer to around here as ourselves, if it simply speaks and you respond to its voice and you act, you can't find a feeling about that act as it's going on. Because if it is acting, then you are being a primary channel for that which responds by acting, not thinking about acting. And the thinking about acting will only happen after the fact, if it happens at all. It's, ooh, I felt bad about that as soon as I did it. Not quite. I felt bad about that perhaps as soon as I was aware I did it. As soon as that part of my molecular structure began to think about what I'd just done, which might only take that fast. But it's incorrect to say I felt bad as soon as I did it. It's I felt bad as soon as that part of me began to take in the event. Took in this change in the biochemical structure out there, vis-a-vis this confrontation between his nose and my fist. Once that came in, it was turned into new biochemical activity in the upper end, up here in my brain, and if that external event turned into a molecular message, and it got in here, and I thought about it, this end thought about it, it might be true that that voice said, ooh, I don't feel good about that. I don't like to do that. Which all of that, of course, is that fast. But it's not true to say I felt bad as soon as I did it. Now, on the basis if that end of the nervous system acted, it does not feel bad. It doesn't feel bad, it doesn't feel good. Because it can't think about it. The other end, it can think about the action, or it can think about the lack of action, and have the feeling of, I am helpless. This can go this and other forms in the past, and pseudo forms, weaker forms of this in life now, will always lead people to some feeling of impotence, if not insanity. That's the only alternative. That I'm beginning to understand so much I feel like I can't do anything. That everything's arranged as it is and it's all working okay. What the hell can I do? And yet something in me tells me to do something. Both parts must be served. The lower part of the nervous system is that which primarily acts when life begins to change. Let me give you as a kind of a task. Go out and walk. I still like that way for the time being. And you take it personally, what you can find as you walk, what you can remember. That is what you can seem to neuralize yourself. Does your feelings, your blue circuit, does it seem to, quote, feel the most about actions or about thoughts of actions? Just go ahead and make it a direct challenge task. See if you can find. It's right there. I'll make it a more specific caveat. I've already hinted, you can't confuse tense. You can't go with ordinary consciousness if you fall back to that level while trying to neuralize such a task. Then you get all tied up in ordinary time. You can't do that. Because when you get that level, you're back in Kairoot's trap. You don't know top from bottom and yesterday from tomorrow. As life grows, since this kind of thing is so condemned by what appears to be religious thought throughout the ages, maybe I'll leave you something else that may sound jarring. Can any of you realize that in a very particular way that the horizontal world, the ordinary flow of life, does reward success and power? Well, that's the very things that apparently would-be mystical systems and all religions say is either condemnable outright, or else is so questionable as to be a waste of time, that it's going to burn up your energy that you should be using for spiritual pursuits. But there's a way in which in a quite real way, that has to do with growth of life, that it rewards success and power. Look at the real rich and the amount of taxes they pay. A few years back, I guess a better example of the other area I mentioned, look at royalty and their relationship to the laws that they created. I mention that not just to be in some crude way jarring to you. You should be able to try now and neuralize things that would apparently be against the grain of how you thought things were flowing, how you thought the kinds of actions would be at some day in the future. But I have got to make this thing start acting, because then life will assist it a little more. That it's, and I don't mean this in any literal sense as you could imagine, but it's to make this start being a kind of floating magnetic field that becomes successful and seems to have a certain power to it, because life will then assist more. It won't have a choice. Of course, now we're left with the question exactly what is it I'm going to do. Well, I see by the old fingers on the hand over there that the tape is running out. Which, to my way of thinking, is a splendid place to stop.